This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for the Orange Coordinated Entry and HMIS training. Today, we will be going over pretty heavy HMIS stuff. That is the intent of today, is to get you guys kind of up and ready in HMIS. So done this training before, similar workflows with balance of state, and it does generally take 2 hours. Today we have 1 hour. We're going to try to get through what we can, but I do foresee we're probably going to need to schedule a second hour, so we'll see how that goes. But I had intentionally kind of blocked it off in 2 parts. So kind of a big picture orientation, just to kind of get our brains in the same space, and then talking through the prevention diversion project workflow and the shelter referral and waitlist today. And then we'll see how far we get if we are able to start the coordinated entry project workflow and the by name list and next steps, or if we're going to have to reschedule that. So we'll kind of see how far we get today. I also don't want to melt brains with how much we're going through, and it can be a lot of content. So very HMIS heavy. I do have a couple of slides with like workflow pictures and stuff like that, but realistically most of it is going to be in HMIS showing you guys the actual workflow. So that's why the video is nice. And again, we're recording it so you have it for later, but we're just going to be kind of playing HMIS today and showing you what your projects look like for this project or for this grant. All right, big picture. So a quick, just kind of overview of what we think of coordinated entry. We have our access points for you guys at housing helpline, CEF, street outreach, kind of wherever people show up in your community. Ideally, at access points, people are kind of getting that prevention diversion conversation, right? And we're hoping to divert folks to prevent them from coming into homelessness. That is not always successful. And then we have folks that enter our emergency services. So at that point, you guys do the VI SPDAT because you're prioritizing for shelter. So folks get the VI SPDAT before going into shelter. Then folks get entered into or connected with some sort of homeless provider, right? Emergency services, shelter, street outreach, those kinds of things. They're on our radar as being literally homeless. And then after that is when we put them on kind of our community by name list, right? After they've already become homeless and we know that they're not really able to self-resolve. Keep in mind that folks can and do self-resolve throughout this entire process, right? And so folks might not go through the entire process. They might go through part of it and might go through all of it, depending. So folks self-resolve. The folks that don't self-resolve, at least fairly quickly, end up on our by name list. And that's when we start doing our case conferencing and start talking about those folks at case conferencing meetings, right? And so everyone who needs referrals to those rapid housing and PSH projects should really be on that by name list and discussed at those meetings. And then that's where folks get referred to rapid housing, PSH, other resources that might be appropriate, other permanent housing openings like Section 8 sometimes, those kinds of things. And ultimately, hopefully they get housed, right? If they're not self-resolving by themselves, hopefully we're connecting them with some sort of resource that gets them housed. Now the timeline on that, we know, varies drastically from person to person. And so we're using HMIS and we're using these SSO grant projects because you guys now have that HUD CE grant, right? And so realistically, everyone that is served by that grant needs to be in HMIS. That's why we're kind of transitioning from Salesforce to HMIS, is because of that grant and the requirements that it uses HMIS. And so to keep things kind of easy, to separate out for reporting purposes, we're chunking your SSO projects within HMIS that you're going to be entering your grant data into 2 different sections. We're calling one prevention diversion. That's kind of those upfront services for folks who are not yet literally homeless or might be newly literally homeless, right? Because sometimes we have conversations with folks that are newly literally homeless to try to get them someplace else as well. And so that's what we're calling the prevention diversion project, is that upfront conversation. Let's try to get you somewhere besides shelter. What can we do? And then our second one is what we're calling the coordinated entry project. Essentially, that's your community-wide by name list, right? This is for all your literally homeless folks in the community that you guys are keeping track of for CE purposes and talking about at those home meetings. All of those things, all of those folks should be in this CE project to capture data on them for grant reporting and then also for your list and reporting. Does that make sense as far as, I know Salesforce has thus far kind of been the one and only place, and it's a very fluid kind of workflow, and it's a very fluid process, and it just kind of like routes you where you need to go. Unfortunately, HMIS does not do that and is not set up that way. So you guys are going to have to choose which of the projects and which of the workflows up front that you need to follow based on that client's current situation. Any questions on that piece or what the two kind of breakups of the project are? All right, I'm not seeing anything come through. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions. And so then Corey sent me this. This is your guys' current explainer. It's a little bit more detailed, you know, than the other question that process that I had kind of laid out. So just wanted to give you a flash of that. And I know it sounds like you guys have had some conversations last week, so hopefully you guys are all in this great brain space of this is what coordinated entry is and this is what we're doing. So let's talk about the prevention diversion project workflow. So keep in mind that these are the HMIS projects, which might fit into your actual community workflow a little bit different, right? And so we're talking about it here as far as an HMIS project, but you have other things outside of HMIS that are happening around these projects, right? All right, and also keep in mind, so this is the kind of the prevention diversion workflow, just kind of flow, big picture, and then we'll jump into HMIS and look at it. But keep in mind for the prevention diversion specifically also, the HMIS projects do not necessarily capture every single piece of the conversation that you're having with folks. It's more of a capturing the results and the information needed for the grant. And so your conversation will probably be a lot richer than these basic workflows and the HMIS project assessment than what you're actually entering into HMIS, okay? So you're gonna have a very rich conversation around all of these things that are helpful and supports for folks, and then only some of that information and the results of the conversation are actually gonna go into HMIS in this project, okay? So just keep that in mind when you're looking at things, is that it's gonna be a cut down, and this is more of a reporting and tracking purposes and not necessarily your guide of your conversation. Starting up here at the top, someone's gonna walk in or call. We don't really have knowledge of their homeless situation, so we're gonna kind of do an initial assessment of eligibility. For this grant specifically, category 1, 2, and 4 folks are eligible for services. Anyone who's not in those categories is not eligible. Category 1 is our literally homeless folks, anyone who is literally homeless by HUD's definition. Category 2 is our at-risk folks, anyone who is imminently at risk within 14 days of losing their housing. And then category 4 is folks that are fleeing domestic violence. So all 3 of those folks are eligible for services, and if you're working with them, should be in one of the 2 projects, right? Anyone else should not necessarily go in the project because they're not eligible. So for folks that are fleeing domestic violence, there is, if you look on HMIS, there is an initial safety screen kind of as far as fleeing domestic violence, and in your conversations, that's probably one of the first things that you guys are going to be asking. Those folks do not go into HMIS. So if you're working with someone who is fleeing domestic violence, they should be referred to your local shelter and hotline that works with your folks, and or whatever's most appropriate for them for safety planning and those kinds of things. So DV folks, if they screen positive for DV, then we're gonna scooch them to that DV shelter or hotline, give them a call, and help them with that safety planning. DV folks should not go into HMIS. Then we have folks who are not eligible, right? So folks who are not going to lose their housing within the next 14 days, those kinds of things, those folks aren't eligible. We're going to stop right there and provide them with prevention resources or other resources that they need to help and hopefully stop them from becoming homelessness and or help with whatever other needs, right? Sometimes it's not necessarily a housing-specific need that you get, but you can refer them to a local food pantry, those kinds of things to get support. Folks that are Category 1 that have been literally homeless for more than 2 weeks, we generally don't do the prevention diversion stuff with them because they've been homeless for 2 weeks. So, hopefully they've already had those conversations. I think there is some room, and that's something that you guys can decide is like, do folks that are homeless for more than 2 weeks get some sort of basic diversion conversation? I think that's okay. But in general, folks that are homeless for more than 2 weeks probably won't be getting much of that diversion work. And so they are going to be scooched to that coordinated entry workflow, right? So they won't go necessarily into your prevention diversion project. Now, the folks that will go into your prevention diversion project and will have that conversation are your Category 2 folks who are newly or at imminent risk within the next 14 days, and our newly Category 1 folks, newly homeless, less than 2 weeks. We're going to try to get them back into housing very quickly. Any questions on the first pieces of like who is eligible and kind of who goes where as far as this first step? All right, we're going to go on. Okay, so after you've established that someone is Category 2 or newly Category 1, that's when you're going to do your prevention diversion project entry in HMIS. So I believe you guys are going to be trying to do mostly live data entry, and so you won't necessarily have a form to fill out. I think we do have copies of forms if you're out in the field or those kinds of things. But you're going to be having that prevention diversion conversation with them and all of that richness and having those conversations, and you're going to be recording that entry in HMIS, and I'm going to show you what that project entry looks like, okay? So after you've determined that they are eligible for prevention diversion, and that's the workflow that you're going to be doing, and that's the conversation you're going to be having, you know that they're going into the prevention diversion project at least first, right? And then we kind of have 2 routes from there, right? We have diversion may be possible over here on the right. If it's possible, great. Work on that diversion, create that plan, connect to resources, do all that stuff that they need to get them diverted. And then if diversion is successful or self-resolution is successful, then you do that exit from prevention diversion. Every person that gets entered into the prevention diversion project also needs to be exited. The timeline in which they are exited depends on your work with them. If you are closing out your prevention diversion work within that same day, then you can do the exit for the same day. If it's going to take you a couple more conversations to make sure they get connected to that resource, or those kinds of things, and you can wait until they're fully diverted before you doing that exit. You're just going to want to make sure that everyone you do an entry for, you do come back and do an exit at some point when it's appropriate, even if it's not the same day. Most of your services might be the same day, right? Because hopefully they're getting diverted that same day, but it's not always the case, and sometimes it takes a bit to get folks connected to resources, okay? So just keep in mind that everyone needs to be exited. There is a possibility that diversion is not successful, right? In that case, we're going to complete the VI SPDAT and get them on the shelter waitlist. We're also going to do referrals to outreach and other resources because the possibility of having an immediate shelter opening is fairly slim in your community. And so we want to try to connect them to other resources or outreach in the meantime to try to help them because shelter isn't available, all right? And then if they become unsheltered, again, you're going to exit from that prevention diversion project, make sure that you've got a VI SPDAT, make sure they're on the shelter waitlist, and we're going to enter those folks into coordinated entry, right? Because now they're literally homeless and they need to be on our radar for literally homeless services and possibly get referred to one of our homeless providers, okay? So if they become unsheltered, they're not able to be diverted eventually or ultimately, then we need to get them into the coordinated entry project, switch over to that workflow, and get them referred to shelter. Any questions on that piece? All right. And then we have the option, the conversation that pretty quickly on, it seems that diversion is not possible, right? So we do then work on that plan for shelter, work on the plan for self-resolution, and same thing if diversion is not successful on the other side, we do the VI SPDAT, get them on the shelter waitlist, refer to outreach and other resources, and then if it is successful, we exit them, and if it's not successful, we also exit them, but in that case, we're doing more work. We're getting them in the coordinate entry project, getting them on the shelter wait list, and doing those things. Okay? Overall flow for prevention diversion in HMIS, that is the basic workflow. Any questions before I hop into HMIS and show you what all this looks like? All right, let's hop on into HMIS then. All right, so we are going to be in the training site today, and I am going to be chatting Angela. All right, so all of these projects are EDA specific, like all of your HMIS projects. Please, please, please make sure that you are coming up into this upper right-hand corner and clicking Enter Data As before you do any data entry for this grant at all, okay? Make sure that you're selecting the correct project. So here you'll see your prevention diversion project. It's labeled Orange County Housing and Community Development, Orange County Prevention Diversion, SSOCE. And then you also have your coordinate entry project up here. We're not talking about that at the moment, but just wanted to let you know that it is up here, and so you'll see both of those, right? Just make sure you're selecting the right one. You select it by clicking this little green plus sign. So we're going to select prevention diversion SSOCE. Now you can tell you're in EDA by seeing these little blue things. If you hover, it'll tell you the full name, as you can see up at the top. So if you're ever wondering what your EDA mode is, you can just hover and it'll do that. Backdate is also important. If you're doing live data entry, backdate, you don't need to use backdate, right? You're just doing it live. If you are not doing live data entry and you collected this information yesterday or the day before, or you were out in the field and didn't collect it right away, then you're going to want to make sure that you're doing backdate, okay? So anything that is live, you're good. If it's old data that was collected previously, you're going to want to make sure you use backdate, all right? Then we have, so now that we're in our appropriate enter data as and date modes, now we're going to start our client data entry. So we're going to click over here on client point. This is where you're going to either search or add a new client. If you search for a client and you see that they're here, so I searched for bugs and Wednesday Bass came up. If Wednesday Bass is the person that I am talking to, please, please, please use that profile. Just click their name with a little edit pencil instead of creating a new one. We want one profile per person. We do not want duplicate profiles because then we have to merge them and it makes our reporting look funky. So please, please, please search appropriately. We recommend searching by first name, last name. If you have the social, the last four of the social, and just searching multiple ways. There's in your new user training, it has the 4 specific ways: social, and names and partial names. So we are gonna do Donald Duck today. Search for Donald. There is no Donald. See if there's any ducks in here. No ducks. All right. So if your person is not in here, this is where you enter all of the information that's going to create their profile. So you want to enter their full name, if they have an alias, and then this is your one and only opportunity to add social security numbers, okay? If you don't enter a social security number here, you don't have access to edit it later, and you have to call the data center to get us to put it in. It's a safety and privacy feature that we have added, or that we have as a setting, is that folks cannot see or full socials or modify socials after the initial input, which is fine if you don't have it at the start. That's okay. It's just then you have to call us and get it inputted. So if you have it at the beginning, it's probably better to put it in. That way you don't have to, wait on us to do that. We're going to put a social in here. And then for this, you also need to report the data quality type. We're adding full social, but there's also partial, doesn't know, refuse, and those kinds of things. So full social. And then we're going to say, are they a military veteran? Yes, they are for this purpose. And we are going to click Add New Client with this information because we are creating a new profile. So yes, we're creating a new profile. We want to add this client. And it's going to check our backdate mode. If you're in the correct backdate mode, just click X here. All right, so this is our client profile page. We are going to go through and add our client demographics. We're going to give them a date of birth. He's probably in the 1975. Full date of birth, male. For race, there are options to select 2 here and 3 more over here on the client profile. If they are only identifying 1 race, just add 1 and then leave the other ones blank. You don't have to put data not collected, those things in there. It gets it funky. So just fill in as many as they have identified and leave the rest of the ones that they haven't identified as blank. But folks do have an opportunity to identify up to 5 races if they would like. Not required, but it is an option. And then ethnicity is also required. So you're going to check and make sure you have client record and client demographic information all nicely filled out. And then down here is where we're collecting those additional races, information for COVID, and some client contact information. So if you want to add, if you guys want to start collecting, I don't know if you guys are currently doing the COVID data in HMIS, this is where you guys could start doing that. And then we have contact information. This is also on the START assessments and stuff like that. So this is not the only place you'll see it, but it is available here too, especially if you're trying to contact someone quickly. You can just pop onto their profile and see it there. And also notes, if you guys want to start using notes internally. I don't, Durham Entry Point uses notes a lot, but most other communities don't necessarily use it very much. It's more of an internal thing. So that is an option. Households over here. This is where you're going to create households if you have more than 1 person presenting together. You're going to start a new household. I'm not going to do it today for Donald Duck because it just sucks up time. There are also specific trainings on showing you how to create a household and new user training if you need a refresher on that. But make sure you're going to check your household tab and add folks to your household if necessary. Then you're going to come to your ROI tab and we're going to add a release of information. Click yes. Generally, our HMIS releases of information are good for 1 year. So we're going to pop that in there. And just so you know, this little, anywhere you see the calendar with the check sign, it changes it to your current date. So if you're backdating, it'll change it to that date. If you're not backdating, it'll change it to today's date. So it's really helpful sometimes, especially when you're running reports, or just selecting dates if you want to use today's date for anything. Documentation, signed statement by client is generally what we're getting, those signed releases, and then witness is empty. Now, I know you guys do a lot of phone calls for access. That is okay as well. We have verbal consents as well that are appropriate for HMIS. Just make sure that you're using the appropriate documents for that. That can be found at nccch.org. The verbal script and the verbal information for how to do those consents. But for calls, verbal consent is also fine. Verbal consents can be good up to a year as well. Ideally, we would get folks to sign that paper form as soon as possible. So even though verbal is good for a year, if you see them in the next month, and just get them to sign that paper release because it's a little bit, it's the preferred option. But verbal is okay if you don't have in-person contact with them quite yet, okay? So just a note on that verbal versus written release. And then we're going to say release of information, and we're going to see that it pops in here. If at any point you see that your provider is not your appropriate one that you're entering data as, then you need to check your enter data as mode up here, right? So as you're entering data, it'll pop up as the provider that you have your EDA mode. Because it looks funky at any point, make sure you're checking your EDA mode up here. All right, now we are going to get in to our entries and exits. Hop over to our entry exit tab to do an entry into our prevention diversion project. We're just going to add an entry. Up here is where you have additional household members. You would click all of those additional household members and make sure they're connected on the entry together. We don't have one here, so that's fine. It's just a note of if there are other household members, you want to make sure you join them all together in an entry, or else your data is going to look all funky. Type is HUD, always HUD for this grant. It's a HUD-funded grant. You're going to, again, check, make sure your provider is correct. And then, again, make sure your date that you're trying to enter data as, or enter data for is correct. If you're doing Current date, it's fine. If you're backdating, you want to check that. We're going to do save and continue. And then this is where all of the data that's going to be entered for this client for their start. Again, this is not the exact conversation that you are having with folks. This is to record the information that you get from that conversation. So our first section is going to be answered for all clients. Housing status, again, this is identifying those 1, 2, and 4 categories, or if they're at risk, stably housed, those other things. Ideally, you would not be selecting those because those folks shouldn't be in HMIS. They should be either 1, 2, or 4. Also, 4 probably should not be in HMIS because they're fleeing domestic violence. So mostly you'll be selecting 1 and 2 here. All right, so we're going to say they're at imminent risk. That's why we're doing our prevention diversion. There are also some directions and explainers in here to help you kind of like navigate the form a little bit and also prompt you to make sure that you're doing things that you should be doing. So if they're at risk, more than 14 days or stably housed, client is not eligible for this project and should be referred to the resource database or emergency financial assistance. Again, that's that prompting of who's eligible. If categories 1 through 4 were selected, continue on with the assessment. Okay, so that's again prompting, but these folks are not eligible and these folks are, so you should continue on. Then we have our safety screen. Are you currently residing with or trying to leave an intimate partner or family member who makes you feel or threatens you or makes you feel fearful? If it's yes, then again, you have your DV conversation. If it's no, then you can continue on. So it says, if yes, it sounds like there may be some safety issues. We'd like to refer you to Compass Center, has your number here, and let's do that. So again, giving you the number right in HMIS just in case you need it. Hopefully you have it elsewhere, but it's there if you need it. And then we have our universal data elements that are collected for every single client. Okay, keep in mind these are entered on all clients. That includes children that are in the household. That includes spouses, aunts and uncles that are staying with them, whoever it is that's presenting together as a household. These need to be collected on all of those family members. And you see that the demographics pulled over from when we entered it on our other profile tab, which is great. It's what it's supposed to do. And then you add in your rest. So this person is single by themselves, so they are automatically the head of household. They do not currently have a disabling condition. They are covered by health insurance because they are a veteran, and so they're getting veterans benefits. And we're going to say their total monthly income is around $750. Client location for you guys should always be 513 Chapel Hill. This is how reports are pulling, SPMs are pulling, and they filter out folks if it is for someone who is not in, if you label this as like Durham, right? So say the person is coming from Durham, but they're talking to you for services. Do not select Durham here. It will filter them out of reports for your COC. So any of the people that you are talking to for your grant need to be labeled with your NC 513 Chapel Hill, okay? Always, always, always select your NC 513 Chapel Hill orange, all right? Our next section is for adults, or for heads of household and other adults. Keep in mind that adults can come from different places, right? They might be presenting together as a household, but they might have been in 2 different places for prior living situation, length of stay, and those kinds of things, right? And so we want to make sure we're asking our multiple adults in case they're coming from different locations. So you're asking about their prior living situation. We have homeless options, institutional, and then temporary and permanent housing situations. And then we have other. Please try not to select other. These pull as nulls on reports, and so we send them to you for corrections and those kinds of things. So it's not really helpful for us. Also, if there's safe haven does not exist in North Carolina. So if they say they're coming from a domestic violence shelter or going to a domestic violence shelter, that is not safe haven. I know a lot of DV places have safe haven in the name. Safe haven is a specific type of program, just like emergency shelter and rapid rehousing, that is funded. We don't have it in North Carolina. So unless they're coming from out of state, they are never coming from or going to safe haven, okay? So just keep that in mind. So we're going to say that they've been in a hotel, and they aren't able to stay. They've been in a hotel and they're been paying and they can't really pay anymore. So they've been in a hotel for 2 to 6 nights. Stayed less than 7 nights. And this homeless history is conditional logic. So as you answer things, more things will pop up. Make sure that you answer them as they pop up, okay? Did you stay on the night before? Did you stay in the street? No. And so that's the end of the homeless history. If you say yes, then it will see more information pops down about approximate date homelessness started, how many months they stayed, and how many times they stayed, right? So if they're there, please fill out all of them. That is a universal data element required for all folks for the grant. If they don't pop up, don't have to worry about it, okay? And then if they're at risk, more than 14 days or stably housed, client is not eligible for this project and should be referred to other appropriate resources. Again, just that checking question of like, hey, is this person eligible? And then again, was the place you stayed last night a safe location? Yes or no? So if no, and then again, we're going to want, that's that second DV kind of screener. Examples of an unsafe environment, if you're fearful. So we gave you some examples down there of what an unsafe environment could be. And then again, a prompt to call Compass Center, the 24-hour hotline there. Okay, so those are most of your like specific client questions. And then we get into our sub-assessments, right? So here's that client contact information again that you saw before. You can enter multiple phone numbers here. You can also add email addresses, mark whether it's okay to receive text if they've got social media. Also, other contact methods that can be frequent location, right? If they are frequently at a specific service agency on Mondays in the afternoon, you can say that. Or if they're at a crossroads that you can meet them at. Those kinds of things, especially if you're referring to shelter and they might get a shelter bed and you're trying to find a shelter bed for them, find them to refer them to a shelter bed, right? Having a location that they frequent could be really helpful especially if they don't have a reliable phone. So fill that out and use it as you need. This is not a required data element and it won't be pulled on like HUD reporting. So this is really for you guys to use as you need for contacting and maintaining information for folks, okay? All right. Then at the bottom here, we have our new CE data elements. And we did a training on them last week. I would encourage you to watch that webinar if you haven't seen it or you didn't see it. These are required going forward October 1 for all coordinated entry granted COCs. So these should be collected for your entire COC. You guys as the CE staffers are going to be doing a lot of that, but that doesn't mean that you're doing all of it, right? Some other folks might be doing some of this as well, but you guys are definitely going to be required to do this. So current living situation is supposed to be collected for every contact to show where they are currently. So we know that can change, right? Folks change their living situation over time, and so it changed. So prior living situation is where you came from the night before. Current living situation is where you are right now and staying right now, today, right? So last night versus today's night or today. So it might be the same, right? Maybe they're going back to the hotel because they can pay for it again, right? They're at risk at this point. So they're saying, hey, I can only pay for the hotel for a few more days, trying to figure out what options are. So they're currently staying at the hotel. If others specify here, living situation verified by, this should be you guys. So you're going to want to make sure that you select your project. Orange County Housing is going to pull up all of your funded projects for that level. So just make sure you pull your correct one here. So you're going to be prevention diversion. And then are they going to have to leave their housing in the next 14 days? Yes, they are. And then if yes, are they going to have to leave in the next 14 days? Then you answer these questions. If that's a no, then you don't have to answer these, and it's fine. If it's a yes, then you do have to answer these. Has a subsequent residence been identified? We're going to say no, not yet. Do they have resources? No, not yet. Have they had a lease in the last 60 days? No. And have they moved 2 or more times in the last 60 days? we're going to say yes. And then again, this location details is an opportunity for you to add additional information if you'd like. Not required to put specific things in there, it's just an opportunity. We're going to save. And you can see that this adds a row here. It's going to continue to add rows as you add more information. Every time you have contact with that client, it'll just kind of, and you'll have a nice history of where they've been. Coordinated entry, we're going to talk about coordinated entry assessment real quick. First, that should be first on the row, but for some reason I think I added them a little bit different here on the training site. So date of assessment, this is going to be used for your prevention diversion assessment, right? So your end date is going to be the same as your date. Assessment location, again, I didn't update, the training site hasn't been updated, but we have those orange specific locations of home link and CEF. Those kinds of things. So you're just going to select your orange location that's appropriate, and Homeless Helpline, I think, is one of them. Assessment type is phone, person, or virtual. We did it in person. Assessment level, crisis needs assessment for this purposes is going to be your prevention diversion screen, and housing needs assessment is that VI SPDAT, okay? So when you do VI SPDAT, you can mark this as housing needs. When you do your prevention diversion, it's going to be that crisis needs assessment. And then prioritization, if they're placed on list or not placed on list. All right, so that is coordinated entry assessment. And then we've got coordinated entry event. Again, there's a whole nother training on this. I'm going through it quickly because we have limited time today, but there is a whole nother training on this specifically. So we recommend you use the same dates for all of this. And here you can say, of what you had conversation. So here we had a problem-solving, diversion, rapid resolution, intervention, or service. That's what we provided today. And then there's conditional logic. So if you answered this, then ask this question. So were they rehoused? And we'll say yes or no based on what's appropriate. So we're going to say yes, they're still in the hotel for right now, right? If they were referred to post-placement or post-placement / follow-up case management, you want the results of that. And then if they're referred to shelter, TH, rapid rehousing, PSH, you're going to put the location. Again, this is that lookup, so you can search like I did for the Orange County housing and search for whatever program you're referring them to, IFC, whatever is most appropriate. You're going to select that there if you're referring them somewhere within HMIS for any of these services. And then referral results. Again, if you don't know this right away, it's okay. You can leave it and then come back and add it after the result is done. But if you know that it was successful, then you can add that or not, and then the date of the result. So here we're going to say this is we had a problem-solving conversation here. So you want to make sure all of those data elements are filled out for the work that you did on your great conversation, and then we're going to click Save and Exit. Any questions on the prevention diversion entry? Any questions on what you're seeing, or it doesn't make sense for what you know and how to fit in? All right. So just feel free to prop in if you have any questions. All right. So again, everybody who gets a service should also be exited. And so we're going to pop in and do an exit right now because we know that we are able to convert them back to the hotel tonight, and so they're not going to become literally homeless tonight, okay? So reason for referral, a reason for leaving, we're going to say completed program. That is not a required data element, but it is nice to use sometimes. The destination is really what we want to make sure. This is the same pick list that you'll see as prior living situation and current living situation. Okay, they should all line up. They should all be the same. And so this person is going back to the hotel or motel paid without an emergency voucher. Then you're going to click Save and Continue. And then this is going to bring up your exit questions. So housing assessment at exit is a question for where if we are able to maintain this. I don't actually think we're using that one in the main one, so I apologize for that. But then again, an opportunity to add current living situation if it's changed since the start of your conversation, or maybe it's a few days later. Same thing with coordinated entry. At this point, if you know the referral results, you can pop back in here and edit and say, oh yes, they were accepted into shelter, or whatever program, those kinds of things. So it's an opportunity to edit those or update those. If nothing has changed, then you don't need to do anything. It's just to record it as it goes, right? And so if it's not changed or it isn't different, then you just leave it alone. If it is changed or added different, then you can just add that information in. And then we're going to click Save and Exit. All right, so that's pretty quick going over the HMIS project and the HMIS prevention diversion, kind of what those screens look like in those forms. Any questions on that before we kind of talk about how we're going to do the shelter referrals in HMIS? All right. Okay, so shelter referrals, waitlist in HMIS. So talking with Corey, it sounded like we had talked about some other options, but using referrals in HMIS made the most sense at that point. The only challenge is because we didn't share referrals in our sharing agreement at this point. We can in the future if you'd like. ISC will not actually see or get the referrals. And so when IFC needs referrals for their beds, the CE staff are going to have to download that list and send either the folks that are next in line for the shelter or send the whole list. I'm not sure who it is that's doing the prioritization for those shelter beds, but you guys will be the ones that are downloading the list, and then you can either send the whole list if they're the ones prioritizing folks, or if you're the ones prioritizing folks, you can use the list, prioritize as needed, and then send those few lists, the few folks, and so instead of doing the whole one. So I'm going to let you know, I'm going to show you how the referrals look in HMIS and what that will kind of look like a little bit. So ideally, folks are going to be have the VI SPDAT before they get into shelter because that's just what you guys are using to prioritize for shelter. So the majority of folks should have a CE project entry before you do the referral. We're going through the CE project entries and stuff tomorrow, so just keep that in mind, is that you're actually going to be making referrals from the CE project. I just wanted to show you what it looked like because we had the bandwidth today, and we probably won't have the bandwidth at our next conversation. So you're going to make sure that you enter data as for your correct project. And then we are going to find our person. So let's say it's Donald Duck. We weren't able to actually divert him, and he needs to be on the shelter wait list. Your referrals are always going to happen here in your service transactions. All right, most of your stuff that you've done thus far is in your client information. This is going to be in service transactions if you haven't used that yet. And you're going to click Add Referrals. So we have, I don't have emergency shelter added on here yet. Oh, why is it not set up? All right, so we're going to select, ideally you would select emergency shelter. For some reason, the training site did not pull that over. And then you should be able to select, I'm going to have your pick list for the provider that you're, but if you don't find them, then you can search down here. So you can see, if you don't see your provider that you're trying to refer to specifically in here, then you can search down here, which is always nice. So we're going to say we're trying to refer to Home Start Singles, and make sure you select them. This is where you can add their VI SPDAT score. So you are going to want to do that because that's going to pull on the report. So we don't have a VI SPDAT score for this person because we didn't enter it yet. But you would see it here and click that little, there's going to be a green plus sign. So you click that and add it. Now, referral ranking, you guys can also decide to use as a community. If you want, you can say high, medium, or low if there's other things that you guys are prioritizing shelter beds on for. I don't know what else you are using for shelter bed prioritization, but if you wanted to, you can add that, right? So we can say that this person is a high referral ranking, right? And then you don't have to do anything with the projected follow-up or anything like that. Make sure this box is checked right here. If it's not checked, then the referral doesn't register for some reason. I don't know why, but it doesn't. And then here you're going to say status is identified and outcome is not met. If you say that it is fully met, then it's not going to show up. It's going to say, oh, this is a referral, but it's already done. So you have to say that it's not met. And if not met, then the reason, you can add that there if you want, so you're kind of just waiting on something. But for these purposes, it's just going to be not met. And then we're going to save. All right, so you should be able to see in their referral tab that they have a referral here. And then if you look in their entire service history, you should also see the referral. And then for every service or referral, it automatically creates a need. So it's going to show that you, as a coordinated entry project, said they had a need for this service and it's not met. All right, so that's where you're going to add it. So you're going to say this is how you add folks to the shelter list, the wait list, right? You just do a referral to the shelter in HMIS. And then to look at that, and pull your list, there's two ways. I prefer the dash list. So these are EDA specific. So we're going to hit refresh and you're going to see outstanding outgoing referrals. So these are your outgoing from your project. And so realistically, this is your shelter wait list right now, right? So we just had one person that we added to the shelter wait list. So you can click one and you can see who is on your shelter wait list. Now this is much longer than this, and over time it will gather those people, right? But you can see that we have client 66. This is his referral date. He has a high ranking. This is the need. It was referred to, and then this is where your VI for that will be, right? So when the shelter says, hey, I have a bed, what you're going to do is you're going to click here, get your list, and then you're going to download the full report. So this is going to be however long, right? It sounds like you guys have a fairly long shelter wait list. So once you download it, give me a second, it's opening up. It will give you an Excel spreadsheet that you're going to have to space your columns out. But it has the VI SPDAT and all of the information that you need, right? And then you can sort and filter by VI SPDAT, by referral ranking, by date, all of those things, and then prioritize folks for shelter based on who's on the wait list. So this is your new shelter wait list, at least to try. I don't know, we might find some bumps in the road with it, and we might need to make some tweaks. But at this point, conversation-wise, this was the easiest option to get a shelter wait list that is easy to pull and those kinds of things. So the dashlets I like the best because it's right here. You just have to hit refresh, right? And then I also programmed it with clients with no entry but exit, so you can see who's in your program. So you can have your dashlets. There's a whole bunch of reports that we could set you up with. Or you can go to report, and there is a referrals report here that you can pull as well. And so you can referral type outgoing referrals from provider, outstanding, and then you can select whatever dates you want and build report, and you can pull it from here as well. So there's two ways, either the dashlet or the referrals report. Either of them will work. And then what happens is once you actually refer this person to shelter, you're going to want to go into their profile. And then this is where you update that referral and say that it's been accepted, right? So now that we've had the referral outcome has been accepted, their need has been fully met, it's closed, we're going to save and exit. And then if you come back out here on your profile, you see that they pull off of your shelter wait list. So we're going to use referrals to and from, and then you guys resolve it as folks get, either they get housed, right, and they no longer need shelter, that's great, or if they get referred to shelter, then you guys just go in and resolve that referral and it'll pull off of the wait list. And then next time you go and try to pull your list, they won't be on it anymore. So it's, I don't know how easy or hard that is compared to your current shelter waitlist process. I feel like it's probably a little bit clunkier, and we can reevaluate if it doesn't work. But at this point, it sounds like that's going to be the easiest thing to work. And we can also add sharing for the referrals to IFC, so that if you guys don't need to be the ones that are pulling the waitlist, and they're open to sharing needs and services, because you have to share all of it, then they could then pull it, and you guys wouldn't have to do that. So I think that's adjustments that we can think about in the future. And I know that is hard, and it seems like a lot. So again, this is not the first time, it's not the last time that we're going to talk about these things or support you in them. It's just to get your feet wet and kind of show you what it's going to look like. Corey, did I miss anything that you wanted to make sure you specifically covered for this piece, or do you have any questions or things that you want to touch on real quick while we have just a few minutes left?
Yeah, I do need to run right at 2:30, but I think the main thing in talking with the helpline staff that they were wanting to see was kind of where things were in the system. Patricia, Angie, Kathleen, do y'all feel like you have that information now, having looked at this, or?
For me, I have the basis of it, but it went through really fast. So it's just like trying to take a photo memory of it. So like, I guess all of us gonna have to like practice first, or either like just, I don't know, that went through really fast.
We have the training site. You have access to the training site, so I can make sure you have access to the project, and you guys can go in there and practice as much as you'd like.
And maybe Angie and Kathleen and I could practice together with Corey or somebody else who knows the system, so that we can, when we're practicing, we make sure that we're doing it right, because I've gotten pretty good at doing it incorrectly so far. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I could use a lot more practice too, Angie and Kathleen. But it was really great to see somebody actually go through and do it correctly. And Nicole, if you could send us a link to this training, I will probably need to watch it again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's hard to smush everything in an hour. So you have to kind of go a little bit quick. But yeah, so we record it, and then you have access to the training site. So you can go in there and play as much as you want. If you do test clients, I'm happy to look them over and like say, oh, this is, went a little bit wonky here, or those kinds of things. So I'm also happy to review them and give you feedback on maybe things to check over and those kinds of things if you'd like. It's not required by any means, but if you'd like, I'm happy to do that.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
I'm sorry to have to run. Nicole, I'll reply to your email to schedule some time. It sounded like you're available Wednesday, but not tomorrow. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, I'm in meetings pretty much all day tomorrow, but Wednesday I'm really open. I have an early meeting, and then I am out after 3:30 for an appointment. But other than that, I'm open throughout the day if you guys have a time slot that works. I'm happy to do an hour if we want to do an hour and a half to make sure we have some more discussion time, knowing, how much we were able to kind of squeeze in and how fast we had to go today. I'm totally open to doing an hour and a half as well if you guys feel like that would be more helpful.
Something that I'm wondering is whether it would be possible to do a case similar to like the practice clients that are at the end of the training, where it gives like that kind of happened with the Donald Duck example, but where it talks a little bit more about their homeless history in a way that's fairly complicated, just because I know the reality is a lot of times people present to the helpline with, oh, they went to the shelter and then they were homeless for 8 months and then unsheltered and then they came back to the shelter. Just calculating the approximate homeless start date is something that I struggle with. So if there were a case that we could go through together that's a little bit more complicated history, I think that'd be helpful. I don't know if people agree.
Don't have anything like created. You're welcome to use those cases as practice clients. That's totally okay too. Also, what you could do is use a story from an actual current client or a client that you have encountered and just not put their actual information in, right? Like put in another name, another social, another date of birth. But you can use stories from clients that you've had. If you know one that's like, oh yeah, this client had a really interesting story, I'd love to see how that like translated into HMIS, and just not put their actual identifying information in the training site. Either way.
Yeah, for sure. What I was just thinking is the ability to walk through it in real time with you or someone who's more familiar with doing it like
Yeah,
right
I think
in
I
real
agree
time.
with, sorry, Amy. Yeah, I would like to second what Amy said. And the problem is we are not good, or I don't want to speak for other people, but similar to what Amy's saying, I do not feel comfortable going through this by myself. So I can like make up a story or like try a practice client, but I will not. It is like 100% guaranteed that I'm kind of stabbing in the dark.
Yeah. Now let's stop the recording.